Hi, I'm Paul Peterson.
And I'm Cameron Terriani. Paul, why might central exams be a solution to the political bargain?
Well, central examinations provide a way for holding students accountable. Al Shanker, the head of the American Federation of Teachers, thought students should be held accountable if you're going to hold teachers accountable. Here's the way he put it. Imagine we should shut down a hospital and fire its staff because not all of its patients became healthy. You know, because No Child Left Behind says everybody has to be proficient. Okay, all patients must become healthy. But we never demand that the patients look out for themselves by eating properly, exercising, and laying off cigarettes. So if the students themselves are the most important individuals involved in education, why shouldn't we be holding the students accountable?
How do we hold students accountable?
Well, traditionally it was the teacher who held students accountable. But the political bargain has made that increasingly difficult, and there's all kinds of regulations and stipulations on teachers, and they feel that it's really difficult and challenging to hold students accountable. So another solution is to have an external examination at the end of each high school course. In this way, the grade is set by someone outside the school district, perhaps by a state government, perhaps by a private agency, but by someone over which the teacher or the student has no control.
What is the advantage of a central exam that's external to the school district?
The advantage is that the teacher is no longer the person who's judging the student. The conflict between teachers and students arises from the fact that the teacher is a judge as well as a helper. In this way, the teacher becomes the coach who helps the student pass the external exam. As Al Shanker put it, it's like the Olympics. There's an external standard that students need to meet, and the teacher is there to help the student make it.
What about the SAT? Could that be our central exam?
Well, we have the SAT, as many of you know, but the SAT does not test students on the content that high schools are teaching. It's supposed to be a test you can't study for. A central exam that can motivate students to higher levels of achievement must be one that you can study for, that you can prepare for. The external examination should be in a specific subject, whether it's chemistry or English literature or history or mathematics, or whatever the student chooses to be focusing upon.
How about advanced placement exams? Those are external exams that some students take at the end of their high school advanced placement courses.
Well, that's a good example of an external examination that works for some students. Some colleges will recognize high school courses as college equivalents if students do well enough on an AP. And some colleges look at AP records when deciding whether or not to admit a student to their university or their college. But less than 10% of the students in any given age group performs well enough on even one advanced placement exam for the course to be counted as a college-level course. The advanced placement exam provides us a way of thinking about how external central exams could function in the United States, but it would have to be broadened and designed so that it could provide a framework for educating all students, not just the small elite group that plans to attend selective colleges.
Do other countries have external exams?
Well, Cameron, it's actually pretty popular around the world to have external exams. This is nothing new. The British have had it for many years. They take courses at the age of 16, and they have to pass an examination, and then if they do well, they stay on for advanced courses, and they take another examination. And the French and the Germans do the same, as do many provinces in Canada, and many Asian countries have very important examinations that students really study very, very hard for because they determine a lot of their future opportunities.
Do the countries that have these exams score better on international tests?
Most of the time they do. On other things being equal, countries with central exams do better on the international PISA test than do the countries that don't have that examination. So that's the best evidence we have from around the world that these external exams actually do boost student achievement.
How does an external exam lift student achievement?
Well, for one thing, it gives greater clarity to students as to what they need to learn. And now you know you've got to pass this examination, and this is basically what this examination is going to look like, and this is what you need to study. And now you don't become antagonistic to your peer group because you're not competing against them at your local school, you're competing against people across the state or across the country. So you can actually learn from your fellow student, and the better students can help the ones that aren't doing so well in a particular subject. So students can work together to help one another pass this examination, and the teacher can become a coach, just as Al Shanker wanted teachers to be. So all of these things can reinforce a learning environment instead of a peer group fighting the authorities within the school system that James Coleman talked about.
What are the problems with central examinations?
Well, you know, the American public very much favors something like this. But I think there's a lot of political challenges in putting this into place. One worry is that it will reduce high school graduation rates, and that's a fair concern. Maybe the best way of dealing with this is to have two diplomas, one a general diploma and the other the academic diploma, which you get only if you take these examinations. But there are other issues as well.
What are the other issues with central exams?
Well, people worried that the tests may not be fair, and it's true that no one test should decide whether or not a student succeeds or fails in school, but this could be addressed by letting students retake the examination, and you can have levels of passing the exam. It's not necessary to have it a pass-fail arrangement. As it is with the advanced placement exam, you can score at various levels on the examination. And some people feel that teachers will be held accountable for ensuring that students pass a test. But other countries have had this arrangement for a very long period of time, and teachers have learned to work with it. So I think that some of the objections are more talking points than genuine objections.
But is there any evidence in the United States that shows that central exams might work?
The state of Massachusetts has the best examination system in the country. Other states do have high school exams, but they tend to be fairly low-level exams that can be taken in 10th grade, and most students will pass at that point. And that's also true in Massachusetts, but Massachusetts does have higher standards than in other states. And Massachusetts is the one part of the United States that performs at a level commensurate with the leading countries in the world. So it's worth looking at what happened in Massachusetts.
When was the Massachusetts high school exam introduced?
It's a fairly recent development. It was introduced in, as you can see on this chart, in 2003. Before that, they were like most other states. They just had the regular high school diploma handed out based on teacher evaluations of students. But beginning in 2003, they said they were going to have a state exam, and it was going to be a fairly tough exam.
It looks like student performance improved substantially after the exam was instituted.
This is true. If you look at this graph here, you can see that in the red line, which is the gains made by students in 10th grade, the cohorts that come in after that exam was introduced in 2003 are doing increasingly better over time. And you can also see an upward tick in performance in the lower grades, 4th grade and 8th grade, as perhaps the entire system is getting geared up so that students are performing at a level that will allow them to pass the exam.
Can we say that the scores improved because of the exam?
Well, you can't say that because it's just trend data. Something else could have been happening in Massachusetts. Massachusetts is a high-performing state in general, although it did get much better on the international tests after they put this into place. But there are many reasons why states can improve, and so you can never say any one thing for sure is the factor. That's the explanation.
Did the number of high school dropouts increase after Massachusetts required to be this exam would be taken after graduation?
Well, that's the concern that people have, is that the dropout rate will increase, and people were really concerned about that when the exam first came into place because it looked like about half the students wouldn't graduate from high school. And it is true that even in 2012, 20% did not pass the examination in 10th grade the first time they took it. However, many of these students eventually do pass the examination, and in the end, only about 2% of the students fail to complete high school because they cannot pass the exam. There are ways of graduating without passing the exam if there are extenuating circumstances. And many students did find a way of passing that examination downstream.
Doesn't this defeat the purpose of an accountability system?
Well, if you say, okay, 2% are going to fail, and that's going to have a negative impact on them, and if you say the rest are going to pass if they take it several times, do you really have an accountability system? But there's always a trade-off between motivating most students and creating barriers that a few cannot surmount. And one of the ways to address this issue, as I mentioned previously, is to give an academic diploma to those who pass the test and a general diploma for those who complete their high school years but do not pass the exam. That way you motivate most students without excessively harming a few.
So what can we conclude about holding students accountable?
The student is the most important person responsible for his or her education. To create a climate where students work together, it's desirable to have an external goal so all students can work together to achieve that goal, and teachers can become the ally of the student. The best students can be enlisted to help other students cross the bar set by this external standard. But these exams have to be designed carefully in order to have them work well. Bob Schwartz at the Harvard Graduate School of Education has long been an advocate of high school examinations. He's thought about the matter for a long time, so let's listen to the case he makes for their use. I have with me this morning Bob Schwartz, a professor of practice at the Graduate School of Education at Harvard University. He has also been very active in an organization called Achieve that has been trying to find ways to lift the standards and lift the achievement of high school students. So he is a person that is really a leader in the effort to really involve students in their own education. And Bob, in Europe, there's a lot of end-of-year course examinations where students take a test on whatever they studied that year, and that's very important for their future, how they do on those tests. And those are statewide tests, not just at the local school. We don't have much of that in the United States. Would we benefit by moving towards the European and Asian model?
I think there's a lot to be said for end-of-course tests. It would be interesting. We do have a group of states that have adopted end-of-course tests, and it would be interesting for somebody to take a look and see, can we draw any inferences?
Are they as demanding as in the European context?
No, they're not. And I think a huge difference is actually that in European and Asian countries, it really matters how well you do on those end-of-course tests, and obviously on the final tests at the end of compulsory education, because your opportunities, whether it's for access to not just to a university, but to a particular program in a university, can depend on your accumulated academic record as reflected in those tests. Or if you want to head off into the world of work, employers also pay attention to how well you did. So I think and it's funny, the late Al Shanker, former head of the American Federation of Teachers, used to argue that for high school kids at least, we need to strengthen their accountability for performance. And I do think it's a challenge in the U.S.
I think he once said, why should you hold teachers accountable if you're not going to hold students accountable?
Yeah, particularly, again, it's once they're past a certain age, if the students aren't willing to put the effort in, there is this problem of forcing, if the teachers have to kind of, entertain, dance, stand on their heads, do whatever to get the kids to take their performance more seriously. And I do think that's a challenge. I think it's also for us, in a way, because access to universities is much more limited typically in other countries. Again, the students understand they're competing for scarce seats. If you look at US high school students, I don't know what, maybe 8 or 10% maybe work really hard in high school because they're competing for seats in highly selective universities. For the bulk of American high school kids, I think they understand pretty early that if their parents have a checkbook, there's a seat waiting for them someplace in higher education, so they don't have the same kind of incentive to work hard. So we've got, it is a point I'm making here.
I read somewhere we have one college seat available for every qualified high school graduate.
And we have seats available for the unqualified high school graduates as well. And I do think that we, in a funny kind of way, we have because we're so proud of being a second and a third and a fourth chance system, we in a sense have a kind of overbuilt higher education system. And again, I do think this raises real questions around how do we create a set of incentives for kids in the middle of the pack to work really hard in high school.
But some people criticize this idea on the grounds that there would be a lot of students who would not graduate from high school if you had these tests. So how do you address that issue?
Yeah, no, I actually, I mean, we're going to have a test of this in a sense with our Common Core standards and with new, more challenging, we expect, assessments that really get at not simply the kids' ability to kind of regurgitate, you know, with the tests that aren't simply fill in the bubble kinds of tests, but tests that really are aimed at assessing whether students can think critically, can problem solve, whether they really understand the underlying, you know, concepts in mathematics, not just the formulas. I think we're going to get some fresh evidence about, you know, just how deep the problem is, and then I think that there has to be a ton more
But there's
work.
already political backlash in New York State to the idea of having more demanding tests. They were a little bit early moving forward in this direction, and there's been a lot of political opposition.
Yeah, this is, you know, it's funny, you referenced my work at Achieve. Achieve came together in the late 1990s out of an education summit in which 45 governors, each of whom brought a leading CEO of a major company in the state, they came together and basically said, we have to figure out how to both provide more support but also more pressure on our education systems to really raise standards and expectations, just because, given that, you know, the rapid changes taking place in the world of work, globalization, you know, influence of technology, et cetera. And I think we've lost a little bit of that momentum, and the real question is now, using particularly, can the Common Core become a kind of rallying cry, if you will? Yes, there is some slippage, there's some backlash, but I think on balance, if we can get over this hump and get the new assessments online and developed, I think there's the potential to actually move the system forward a bit.
Well, can we have 2 degrees? Could you have an academic high school diploma and a general diploma for those who do not want to take these tests?
Yeah, I'm against that. I'm for more options and choices in the upper high school years in particular. I mean, in my view, the systems I most admire have a common curriculum, at least up through what in our terms would be grade 10, and where the expectations are, we've got to figure out how to get everybody up to a certain kind of a threshold with a strong underlying set of foundational skills. Then I'm for diversity, depending on students' interests, but a single diploma, but you know, where the diploma would reflect the courses and the choices that students took. You could have end of course tests, you know, across a broad range of subjects, and how well students do on those tests ought to actually count in terms of their ability to graduate. But I don't want to go back to the dual diploma model, because I do think it, you know, we have a tradition of tracking which I don't think has been a healthy one, particularly given the degree to which tracking historically in the US has reflected race and class, less, I think, been less sensitive to ability and potential. So no, I'm not for a dual diploma, but I am for more choice and more diversity in the upper high school years.
So now in Massachusetts, they have put together a state exam for high school graduation. And Massachusetts stands #1 among all the states. It looks pretty good on the PISA when you look at it compared to other countries around the world.
Right.
What do you think is the secret sauce in Massachusetts?
Well, that's interesting. Massachusetts, you know, it passed a comprehensive reform bill in 1993 in which there was a pretty explicit bargain. And the bargain, you know, between the kind of the policy community and the education community was, we're going to raise standards, we are going to strengthen accountability, we're going to put in place a more challenging exam than we had before, and over time we're going to raise the bar, that is how well students have to do in order to graduate. But we're going to accompany that with a significant infusion of not just of new dollars, but new dollars progressively targeted to the highest need cities and students. And I think that bargain has really worked well for Massachusetts. It's interesting, it's not an end of course model. It is a competency, you know, exam at the end of actually administered first in the 10th grade, and then with multiple opportunities if you don't get over the bar that first time around. But I think that combination has really worked here.
Well, thank you, Bob. It's been great chatting with you, and I hope some of your ideas make their way into the policy world.
Well, no, thanks,
Thank you
Paul.
very much.
Yeah, my pleasure.